And welcome everyone to another episode of the Mind Sculptors podcast. I am your host, Callahan, and we have a great show lined up for you all today. We're bringing you part 2 of our 2021 even more definitive tier list. But before we get into all of that, I just want to thank you all for joining us this week. If you like this episode or our last episode or any of the other episodes we do here on the Mind Sculptors, please make sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below. If you want access to our Discord server and some extra content when we get around to it, make sure to head on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/mindsculptors or check out the link in the description. Here with us again today is my good friend Ryan over from Playing with Power. Ryan, how are you doing?
I am fantastic. I'm surprised you actually let me back after the debacle last week. So.
Oh, absolutely. I love having Ryan on every single time. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks. It's a pleasure being on.
Yeah, absolutely. I got to tell you, Ryan, as two people from Ohio originally, we're recording this on Thursday night and the Buckeyes are playing right now and are about to play while we're recording this. And I just got to say, as a devout Buckeye fan, I need you to know how high on that this is very important to me that we're recording this. This is interfering with football, man. And also joining us again today this week is my friend Pongo up there from the great city of, what is it, Montreal, Quebec.
That's right.
How are you doing today, Pongo?
I'm doing well. I actually slept last night, unlike last time. So I anticipate being a little bit more articulate today.
Your cat didn't wake you up in the middle of the night?
No, and hopefully I should remember card names a little bit better than last time as well.
That was something I struggled with too. So you're not alone in that.
I struggle with that on a good night's sleep.
Yeah. So one of the things I know we wanted to get into are two things. One, Pongo, I believe you wanted to revise one of your ratings from last week.
Yep. So I guess before I get into that, let me just talk a little bit about the criteria we had discussed last time and kind of all agreed that we thought were sensible as far as trying to put commanders into like the S tier. And then obviously for each tier below that, you kind of just imagine that your commander in question is like some fraction of as good on all of these various factors. So the commanders that are sort of consistently and reliably at the top of the metagame, I would say, at least for myself, and I'm going to be rating commanders based on these criteria, they will have some combination of colors, generally lots of colors. So having more access to cards obviously gives you more options for combos, gives you more options for efficient interaction and tutors and so on and so forth. So this is one of the most important things that's going to, I think, distinguish some of the top rated commanders. Of course, it's not the only thing. It's not enough. And I think today we'll probably get into a few commanders where that doesn't always hold true, if I had to guess. Additional factors are a commander should be a powerful combo enabler. And so that's either as a combo piece itself or as an outlet for a combo. And we'll be talking about both of these, I think, today. In addition, this could also be something that essentially enables a combo in some other respect. Often that'll represent like tutoring for a combo piece or something along those lines. Then finally, we have like powerful value generation. And powerful value generation implies that the commander should either do some combination of drawing cards, tutoring for not necessarily just win cons, but, additionally for cards that are going to, go into your hand and give you more options as far as playing the game is concerned. And additionally could represent additional options for spending mana. We talked about Kenrith last time, and Kenrith's a great example of that, where Kenrith gives you a ton of abilities and you can sink mana into those abilities, and it improves your action economy by giving you all those additional options. So I would say that, as far as S tier commander, you're going to have a pretty solid slice of, some combination of those three. Or you're going to be particularly high ranking in some combination of those three. And then for A tier commanders, you're going to be a little less good at some combination of those three. B tier, a little less good again, and C tier and so on, a little less good again and again. As far as colors are concerned, I have my biases. I think that certain colors are going to contribute more toward pushing you into the S tier than others. And some combinations of colors will also push you more toward the S tier. And I think we'll get into that sort of a little bit later on in the episode. As far as the commander I wanted to revise, last time I guess didn't think about it quite enough, or rather I've thought about it more since then. And I think the commander rating that I want to revise is actually Winota, Joiner of Forces, which I gave it a C. And I think that I would actually push it up to a B. Okay. And that puts me in line with both Ryan and Callahan. And so this one's interesting because Winota obviously not doing fantastically in terms of colors, at least, sort of by my internal metric. But I do think that her value generation is kind of like second to none in a lot of respects. And additionally, I do think that she is in colors that make it, she's in colors that naturally, I think, by virtue of the options available to them, frequently want to be playing that grindy game plan and that like interactive kind of game plan, notably white with all the hate bears and stuff like that. And red also, with certain access to additional, hate pieces and so on. As a result, I'm kind of willing to look past like the natural weaknesses of white and red to some extent, because she herself is so powerful and she operates along an axis that works so powerfully within what that color pair often wants to do. That I think, she pushes into the B tier for me as a result.
Right. Makes a lot of sense to me. One last bit of housekeeping before we get on into our tier list is I wanted to clarify a little bit of something for specifically the Krark fans out there. Because I went back since last week and put into our spreadsheet here where we have everything of where we ranked things last week. And Ken also pointed this out to me after the fact that I actually, even though I was speaking how great Krark was, how good it was, gave it a C where I gave it a B last year. And I think last year I just overrated it, honestly. I think C is exactly where it should be. So I wanted to clarify that for everybody. So
you're saying you always rated it highly, but you're kind of regressing the rating toward the mean, so to speak.
Yeah. Like I'm not saying it's getting worse. I just think that my overall opinion of it is that, it's pretty good, but it's not great. And that feels warranted of a C to me. B is where we're starting to get into, okay, this is pretty good. You're starting to really get there for me. So that all out of the way. Our first card on the list is kind of an oldie. It's a Sinestra staple, is Tasigur the Golden Fang. And so Ryan, last year you gave Tasigur a B, and this year, what are you thinking? Where does it fall for you now?
So Tasigur is in Sultai colors, and Tasigur has been around for a long time on the cEDH scene. You have back in, the 2018s and 2019s, Sultai was kind of the color pie to be in when it came to being in cEDH. They were kind of the best. And Tasigur offered a lot of stuff. Number one, it could cheat mana costs all day long through its delve ability. You could recur stuff from your graveyard. It was a combo enabler, so it gave you an advantage and a combo outlet, and it did all of these different things. And so Tasigur was always ranked kind of high, but last year and then leading into this year, Tasigur has been kind of falling out of favor, if you will. I've said it multiple times in other places. I'll say it here again. in cEDH nowadays, you really miss the lack of red. They've been printing cards over and over again that have just been so good in red, Breach and Dockside and stuff like that, to where if something doesn't have red, it almost feels like it's a handicap nowadays. Now, I'm not going to go in so far as to say Sultai is a new Boros, because obviously that is not the case. Sultai is still super powerful colors. But a problem with Tasigur isn't the fact that he is falling out of favor or becoming weaker because everything that's coming out is so much more powerful and stuff like that. Is I think, honestly, Tasigur just suffers the problem of age. Tasigur is still good today. Like, you don't see it anymore, not because it's like, oh, well, this card just gets blown out by X, Y, and Z. I think just people really like playing with their shiny new toys. Commander Legends came out, shook up the whole meta. Everyone wanted to play with the new partners. It was just a natural thing that we all do. People that are entering into this format that never played in 2018 and 2019 really don't think of something like Tasigur. They are looking at the new things that they did when they cracked open their pack, because they're brand new to the format, and they pulled something like a Tevish Zot, and they're like, oh, what a cool card. I want to build a commander, build a deck out of this. And that's really what Tasigur suffers, in my opinion, at the end of the day. I think Tasigur is still a really good card. And I still think it belongs in the B category. It still does everything I want it to do. Yes, it does suffer from not being in red. We have all kinds of things, but that doesn't make it bad. That doesn't make it a bad card. It's still a great card. It's still a great deck. And at the end of the day, I'm still going to keep it in B.
All right. Pongo, last year you had it at C. What do you think about that? Do you still think it's a C tier commander?
I don't remember what my reasoning exactly for giving it a C was last year. I'm not going to beat around the bush. Obviously, I agree with Ryan here that we're not talking about an S tier or even an A tier commander. I do think that this is a B tier commander, and I think that Tasigur is like the quintessential B tier commander. Like, I think he kind of like is currently holding a sign that says B, and like all the other B tier commanders just like rally around the sign and Tasigur. For the reasons that Ryan mentioned, he's obviously in good colors, but you can kind of now go into 4 and 5 colors. Additionally, while Tasigur, does do the thing, he is an outlet for infinite mana. He's kind of like outclassed now by like Thrasios Tevesh, if you just wanted to play like Sultai mid-range, or even like a kind of like turbo-y Sultai deck, where you can get access to, a commander that's kind of like a little bit easier as far as like generating value with is concerned, because you can dump colorless mana into it, but then also you get like Tevesh Zot just like for free, and you're in the same color combination. And you get to play like kind of all the same combos. So it's like, it kind of like makes you wonder, like what Tasigur's niche is these days. Beyond that, I think that like, I appreciate Ryan's point where he said that, like once upon a time, I can remember when Tasigur was kind of like the only option really. Like if you wanted to play like a sort of generic good stuff Sultai deck, it was like that, or like Sidisi if you wanted to play like a more like sort of like all-in combo focused deck. But if you just wanted to play like good stuff, we didn't have Thrasios and Tymna back then, which is, another kind of compelling argument against Tasigur in a lot of respects as well. But back in those days, Tasigur would have probably been, very easily an S tier commander just by virtue of the color combination, the lack of options in other colors, and sort of like just the generic outlet that he represents in good colors. And we've had a lot of good cards printed since then. The format has changed dramatically, and nothing about Tasigur has changed. The rest of us have grown up, but Tasigur unfortunately is the same old man child without a shirt and just a banana.
You make me feel so sad for Tasigur. I want to go build Tasigur now. It sounds so lonely.
I have a very different opinion from both of you. Last year I said it was an S tier commander. This year I'm going to continue to say it's an S tier commander, actually. here's my reason.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Here's my reasoning. I think you both bring up valid points, but I'm going to argue with a little bit of it. First of all, I think saying that because new toys came out that aren't necessarily better, but they're different and they're new isn't a criticism or a knock on the tier or the value of the commander. I think that, it's kind of the same thing we were talked about last episode, right? Where it's like, we can't evaluate stuff on the axis of how like the best people play it. I don't think we can evaluate it purely on the axis of, well, people are more interested in this right now because it's new. And I don't think that's entirely fair. The other argument I have is I kind of look at this about the same way that I looked at Cazur and Kess last week, as it's a very powerful mid-range strategy. And it ticks all the boxes, right? You have great access to colors in Sultai. It's a powerful combo enabler in that it's an infinite mana dump. And it's a powerful value generator. And to me, it checks all those boxes. And the question I have in my mind when evaluating this card is I evaluate it about the same way that I do as Cazur and Kess. The difference is I think I rank it higher off of the back of those three criteria. It's great colors, great combo enabler, and great value generation. And I mean, this is a commander that you can take in a lot of different ways and is enabled by Delve. It interacts really favorably with Delve and Jeweled Lotus. And it allows you to play evolution strategies that you would not be able to play in other decks. I think that there's a lot there. And again, to Ryan's point, there's a lot of people where it's, new shiny toy, but I don't think that takes anything away from the card. I still think it's very powerful. And so I'm going to stick with my S tier rating. I think it's still really good.
Yeah, I think you raise a good point with the evolution strategies in particular. That's obviously kind of like, in some respect, the niche that Tasigur has found himself in, because that is like one thing he can do that sort of like the obvious alternatives don't do. That being said, I'm not necessarily convinced that that's like what you want to be doing, as into like sort of the blind in a lot of respects. And I do think that you're talking about a strategy that in some ways kind of opens you up to, you produce surfaces to get interacted on, where you're sacrificing your Tasigur to like neoform it. And then if neoform gets countered, because, that neoform ends up being a pretty big threat, you have sunk a pretty reasonable amount of investment into that whole strategy at that point. And I think you're making sort of other deck building, you're making other concessions to enable that strategy as well.
I mean, I feel like you could say a very similar thing about like Tevesh Thrasios midrange, right? Like you're dumping a pretty heavy mana investment into getting Tevesh out. That gets countered or dealt with. Well, you're kind of left SOL.
Well, I think Tevesh is harder to interact with though, because
really
there's
it's a non-creature spell.
Well, but most of the like efficient interaction we're playing these days like are not even negates. Like they hit instant sorceries.
Fierce Guardianship hits non-creature. Force of Negation hits non-creature. Like the really good,
but like Flusterstorm, Dispel.
Well,
like
yes,
the blasts.
Yeah, but this isn't a blue permanent. This gets around the blast anyway.
Well, I'm talking about like if you're going to neoform into something, for instance.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, yes,
but I do think that Dispel obviously doesn't hit neoform, but like we're talking about Swan Song, Flusterstorm, two of the most played pieces of interaction that are likely to come down or be held up very efficiently. I mean, obviously free interaction, the majority of those are negates as well. And some amount of those are going to be pointed at Tevesh, but like we're still talking about like a wider sort of sample that hits like the neoform that you're sort of investing your Tasigur into. You know, I think ultimately it's kind of a dice to removal argument. So
right.
like,
yeah, that's very true.
It's I don't want to put too fine a point on it, but I just think that like you can be doing similar things in other strategies as far as like, you know, grinding value is concerned. But like have it be more sort of self-contained.
Yeah. I mean, I think you make valid points. I don't know. I think you guys are being a little harsh on it. I could meet on a middle ground of A pretty easily, honestly.
Stick to your guns.
I'm going to stick to my
hill.
But honestly, like if my point is it's like, I think B is undervaluing it. I might be overvaluing it at S, but like, I think it's just as good as Kess and Zur in my mind. And I have those at A, and I think it's a little bit better than those. And
yeah, so that was going to be my other argument is like, you are essentially saying that you think it's better than Zur and Kess. And I actually kind of just think it's a little bit worse than them. Well, I mean, it's worse than Kess, and I think it's
it checks all the boxes, right?
I mean,
it checks all three of the boxes.
Technically checks like all the boxes too.
Right, but this checks it in the way that that Thrasios checks it too. Like this is closer to Thrasios in my opinion than Zur.
I think the infinite mana outlet part of Tasigur is like considerably weaker than the Thrasios.
Well,
outlet.
yes, but it's considerably closer to Thrasios in comparison, in my opinion, than it is to Zur. And I think it's much closer in value generation to Thrasios than it is to Zur. We could probably do a whole episode on this alone.
Probably. We should move on.
Yes, the episode of why Tasigur is not S tier.
Yeah.
The Mind Sculptors podcast.
Anyway, on to...
I would say, you know, definitely everyone listening in on this episode, you know, tell us in the comments where you think Tasigur belongs.
Absolutely. I probably am overvaluing it, but I'm going to stick to my guns and say S.
I think I probably gave it a C in the first place because of the association with Sinestra. and you know, I with that same association, I just don't feel comfortable going past a B.
Fair enough. Next commander up on our list
you know what B stands for.
Next commander on our list is the next commander on our list is the First Sliver. Last year, Ryan, you gave it a B. Last year, you gave it a B, Ryan. This year, do you think it's got better? Has it gotten worse? What do you think? Where's food chain for you?
Yeah, this is hard because so the First Sliver is still primarily a food chain commander, and food chain as a strategy keeps kind of falling more and more out of favor every year, you know, in favor of, you know, the Turbo Nos strategies. Thoracle's really taken over. And so like to be in 5 colors and to do a food chain thing is neat, but it just seems like so much more setup compared to what you can do nowadays. Our win conditions are so compact and efficient now to create this situation where you have to put things in different zones in order to be able to execute your combo. You have to like have something in exile or this, that, and the other, or to be able to do all that just seems like so much more setup. And you just find yourself saying, well, why don't I just play Thoracle, or why don't I just play Breach? And guess what? The First Sliver does that. It's like the First Sliver is doing those things, but it's also jamming in this food chain combo to try and either not lose its identity or really kind of double down on the idea of cascading forever. And so you have a scenario where you are trying to be the best deck you can be, but you slowly lose your identity in the process because food chain is just falling more and more out of favor every year. It is in 5 colors, so obviously best cards because it could literally pick from any card in the pool, but 5 pips is real hard compared to, like, let's say Najila or Kenrith, you know, quintessential S tier 5 color commanders. do not have such a restrictive casting cost. So that's a real mark against the First Sliver, in my opinion. And the First Sliver, there's an Underworld Chain Sliver deck that's kind of on the database now that is a little bit farther away from the food chain. It has fewer cards that are part of the combo. Like it loses Mist Hollow, and I think like one of the Exilers, like Extract or something. And it goes a little bit more into like a wheel strategy / turbo strategy where you're doing something like Calling the Ritual or whatever. So it's doing that. So once again, it's still trying to be these other turbo decks, but it doesn't have things like the advantage in the command zone that something like Tevish Thrasios gives you or Tevish Crom gives you. And so you're just sticking here with only a combo piece in the command zone. And not to mention it's a 5-pip combo piece. And that's tough. That's hard. It's a hard pill to swallow. Is it as bad as C tier? The colors really give it a lot, is it A tier? I don't think it's there either. I just don't think it really stands up to the bad boys that are in A right now that kind of do just about everything you want it to do. Food chains, I'm sorry, not Food Chain Sliver, but the First Sliver is just kind of sitting in the command zone until you're ready to win the game. And we really demand a lot out of our command zone nowadays. I'm really hard pressed. I think I might actually demote it to C this year, but I'm going to say B again.
Is nostalgia playing a factor in that?
I guess. I think so. I don't know, because like, is it C tier? I mean, it kind of feels a little bit like Kodama of the East Tree, which is what we, last week we talked about it, and it fell into C in my opinion. And yeah, I get those vibes with the First Sliver. So I'm going to put it at C. Yes, It's in more colors, but I think C is where it really belongs nowadays.
Pongo, you gave it an A. Do you still think it's an A, or is it closer to where Ryan has it?
So, I mean, obviously, the First Sliver is a deck that I've worked on like a fair bit recently. You brought up the Underworld Chain Sliver. And I think, working out those lines does, bring a lot to First Sliver. Kind of brought it finally after a long period of sort of not being worked on more into, 2020, 2021, whereby, we kind of worked out the layering with Underworld Breach and stuff like that, changing the WinCon package around a little bit to improve the card quality and improve the explosiveness of the deck. I disagree pretty strongly with the C tier. I think that, where I do agree with your points that, you pretty much, don't have a commander, for the most part. We're still talking about a 5-color commander that is, an outlet in the command zone for its combos. I think that it's kind of still critical to look at the fact that like this is, especially some of the more modern First Sliver decks, a perfectly capable turbo Nas deck, capable of casting early ad nauseum and winning along that axis, capable of winning with Underworld Breach lines, capable of winning with Thassa's Oracle lines. Like it has all the best combos. Food Chain also enables something else. It turns your Tainted Pact and your Demonic Consultation into sort of pseudo 1-card win conditions, which I think is a point that is often underappreciated when people are discussing the First Sliver. I think on the whole, the First Sliver is kind of like an under evaluated deck. I think that people are like far too hard on this deck. And a big part of it is like people just don't really play the First Sliver much anymore. So like there's just kind of like there's like a blind spot for the deck because like people don't see it a ton. And as a result, I think that people tend to, they often will be a little bit harder on it than it deserves. I don't believe it deserves to be a C. It's certainly not an S. And I think that you raised good points as to why it doesn't deserve to be in the S tier. I think sacrificing your commander is kind of, it is asking a lot to be in the S tier. But, I think I'm a little higher on the First Sliver than a lot of other people are. And I think, this is, it might be a low A or a high B. And I think I'm willing to put it in low A just because of, again, like the wide spectrum of combos that it has access to, the high card quality. And, I think that, while food chain combos are not as good as they used to be, there's some like really nice layering with some, the new technology. And, it does give you access to something that a lot of other sort of like, 4 and 5 color decks don't necessarily get to have with the Forbidden Tutors. They can certainly try. And, it works a reasonable amount of time to like just demonic consultation for like an ad nauseum or whatever. But it's still a little riskier, a little less clean than if you're, trying to, flip a coin, hit both the A plus B part of your combo, and then just win for 3 mana after the fact.
Man, you and I are just not going to get along today, are we?
Oh boy, I'm wondering where this is going. Then
I think it's a D tier commander.
Whoa,
yeah,
D tier commander.
I have all the food chain commanders down there. Heads up. I think food chain's an awful strategy to be on in 2021. I think it is completely not worth the slots. I think it's too slot intensive, and that's coming from somebody who plays Hulk and Academy Rector.
Well, how many slots do you think it takes?
More than it's worth. This is a deck that gets shut down on like 90 different angles, right?
It does get shot down by like Drannith Magistrate pretty hard.
Drannith Magistrate, Rule of Law, and Heuristic Study. It just can't win through those.
It can win through Heuristic Study with SQE specifically.
Okay, so you have to have that specific card in your deck. And you
can win through it with like a silence as well, technically.
Well, yes, but I can win through anything with a silence, right?
Yeah. So you're naming things, and technically it's like one additional thing that it can't play around. I mean, it can even still play around Drannith Magistrate, right? Because you just have manual like Oracle lines. So like it doesn't shut the deck out as much as like you're making it out to sound, right?
Yeah, but I'm not going to evaluate every single blue-black deck on the axis of, well, they have the Consult Oracle, because like
I think you have to.
Like, yes, it's good, but it's just like what else does it bring to the table, right? And here's really where it comes down to, because I'm going to evaluate it along this axis, and I'm going to spoil a little bit of upcoming thing for you. Is I think Golos is a C tier commander, and I think this is worse than Golos. And I could not, it's 5 pips. So you don't really have any advantage in your command zone. It doesn't give you, what is it? It's a powerful combo enabler. I'll admit to that, but it's not a powerful value generator. You don't get much out of it, and it's hard as hell to cast. And you have to layer so many different things with it to make the food chain, to diminish how bad the food chain playing really is. And I think in 2021, given how fast the format is, how prevalent Rule of Law decks and those types of combat-oriented decks are, I don't think any deck that is wanting to do food chain is quite good enough. I get what you're saying about the Forbidden Tutors. I think that's really good. I just think of the greater context of what's going on. I wouldn't feel comfortable taking this into a blind meta at all. And that's and this isn't coming from somebody who doesn't play against this at all, right? Snacks is a Mind Sculptor. He plays this in the Lincoln meta all the time, and I'm just never impressed by it. I never see it do anything crazy. I've seen it win, but I've never seen it be really powerful. And I've never been impressed with it. I said it was a B last year, and I think it's even worse this year.
All right. So. Counter argument. You think it's as good as Oswald?
I would say it's high D and Oswald's low D. I'll give it that.
We're giving the D pluses and the D
minus. Giving the D pluses. I just I'm just going to spoil it for you. All of the food chain decks, I just am so not impressed with right now, and that's kind of how I feel. Like I just like I was when I was going through and reviewing my notes, it really came down to would I rather play a Golos 5-color deck or a First Sliver 5-color deck? Because, right now, if you're not playing Kenrith or Najeela, those are kind of the two other ones outside of like the Cody deck, right? And personally, I would much rather play Golos. I could play Golos on turn 1 and hold up interaction. I can't do that with the First Sliver, and that's a huge ding against it to me. Honestly, is just it just doesn't feel quite good enough anymore. But that's kind of how I feel about it. I don't know. I'm probably wrong. About most.
Now he has
picks,
2 hills to die on.
Yeah.
I do.
That's a lot of hills to die on.
This is the episode where all my hot takes come out.
That is fine. I am fine with that.
That's just be prepared that I have some hot takes in this one.
Oh, I can't wait for one in particular.
Up next, like I said, is we're going to look at the other end of the spectrum with from the First Sliver. It's hard to cast the First Sliver, right? It's easy to cast Golos Tireless Pilgrim. So this was a card that we did not evaluate last year, but several people wanted us to give our take on this card. So Ryan, you didn't rank it last year, but what are you thinking? Where does Golos stand in 2021?
So with Golos, for me, it's 5 colors, so that's great. And it's colorless, so that's even better. So you can, dump Grim Monolith or whatever into it to get it cast. So what is it doing in the command zone? You can basically cast all your spells for free if you have an infinite mana outlet that provides Wooburg, of course. And it also fetches up a land. What I've seen a lot of times with Golos, and I'm sure there's other decks out there, but the main one that I have experience with and that I have seen out in the wild is the one that fetches up Beseiju and casts an uncounterable ad nauseum, like turn 2 or something like that. That's really powerful. Yes, it's not any card in the command zone. It's not D-Tutor in the command zone, but the one card that you are getting that you essentially have in the command zone, with Golos, you essentially have Beseiju in the command zone.
Yeah.
The one card you're getting is the card that's going to stop everyone else's interaction from you winning. It's like everyone's interaction is stack based nowadays. We're in the dispels. We're into miscasts. We're into all of these types of things nowadays. And that Beseiju is such a silver bullet against all of the stack interaction we have nowadays. It is really good. What's also really nice is that, I'm going to blow up your commander so you can't, find some sort of infinite mana outlet and then, cast everything. Okay, that's fine. Well, with Golos, your commander tax is only 1. It's not 2. Because you'll fetch a land and then you just play a land next turn, recast Golos.
Right.
And then somebody destroys it. You cast it again, you fetch a land. You can keep doing that over and over, limited by the cards in your hand, of course. So the fact that it has a quintessential commander tax of only 1 versus 2 is really nice too. I know it's not a bulletproof, but it is something that I do take into account. You can cheat it out with colorless mana, which is really nice. It's still in 5 colors, which is still really nice too. And it's ad nos. We were talking about the previous thing. We were talking about First Sliver and stuff like that when we were just talking about that. We were talking about, if I want to be doing this or doing that. Usually what you're talking about nowadays when you're talking about building a deck is you're building a strategy. And a lot of times you're kind of picking the commanders that go really well with that strategy. I want to play ad nos. I want to play stacks. I want to play X, Y, or Z. And there is a certain degree of pet cards that might make you choose a certain commander over another. But if you're just going for raw power, if I'm going for 5-color Turbo Nas or something like that, why wouldn't I pick Kenrith? Why wouldn't I just pick Najeela and then have another combo in the command zone? And so it does suffer that problem. That
it's a better Adnos commander for sure.
I mean, yeah. Compared to like Najeela, sure.
It's a better Adnos commander than Kenrith. Absolutely. You basically laid that argument. Yeah.
So, but at the same time, we have like, if I'm playing Adnos strategies, is this the best one to play? Well, some might say that maybe Tavish Crom is a better Adnos. Maybe some people might, if you want to double down into Adnos, you might go Roger Silas. I don't know. We could maybe discuss the nuances all day long. I think it is better than the First Sliver. I do think it's better than that. It's not on Food Chain or anything like that. Do I think that it is the best commander there is for Adnos? I don't know if it's the best, but it is definitely up there. So I'm probably going to give it an A because of that. Not S tier in my opinion. It does have some of its shortcomings. It is in 5 colors. It doesn't lend itself to a bunch of different strategies. Like Najeela can be, well, you could build her almost any way and she still does well. Kenrith, you can pivot on all kinds of different axes and he does really well. Golos is a little bit more, one directional. You can play this as ad nos and you can maybe try other things, but it just doesn't do as well. So I'm going to probably put it in the A tier. It doesn't belong in S in my opinion.
Okay. Pongo, what do you think? We obviously didn't rate it this year, so I have nothing to throw at you. But what do you think?
Well, I mean, so there's, as far as I'm concerned, 2 different Goloses. There's Workshop Golos with no win condition. And you know what I'm talking about, Callahan?
I love that deck. So much fun.
And so I'm not going to get into that one because I think that actually Ryan pretty much nailed it. Despite my joking, I think that Golos doesn't actually lend himself super, super well to being built in any other way, really. In more casual tables, obviously you can build them as just 5 color good stuff and expect to like flip into really, really cool things. But in cEDH, his ability might as well like not exist. Like it kind of is, you're going to maybe use it 1 in every 100 games, right? That being said, Golos does, like Ryan said, check boxes as far as being 5 colors. It is a sort of valuable thing that you have in the command zone as far as like it can tutor up Boseiju. And if you really, really wanted to, you could build like an infinite mana Golos deck. Of course, like needing to be able to make Wooburg repeatedly is really awkward. And so kind of begs the question why you would do that. But, it's an option. Ultimately, I kind of fall directly sort of in the same place as Ryan. It's an A tier commander for me. I think ultimately, if you're talking about 5 colors, if you're talking about ad nauseum, you can basically build an ad nauseum deck in 5 colors. And like the floor for that is super, super high. I think that even without a commander in 5 colors, like, fast ad nauseum strategy, the strength of your 99 or your 99 is just so powerful that, you're almost just by virtue of that immediately in B tier at minimum. And then if you like do anything at all in the command zone, or like contribute in any other way toward having, like some additional, outlet potential or whatever, that for me at least pushes you from B, either into like, like with, I was saying with the First Sliver, either like high B, like, so B plus, or straight into A. So that's Golos for me.
All right. I think you guys have talked me into this because you all make really good points. And I actually had it in B originally. I don't know why I thought it was in C, but A feels right. So I feel okay giving the First Sliver the bump up to C. How about that?
First Sliver bump up to C.
Yeah, I'll give it the C.
All right.
He's slowly falling down the hill he was supposed to die on.
Well, so much of it was predicated that I thought that Golos was better than First Sliver. And I was like, you know what? If I'm going to move Golos up to here, I don't think the First Sliver is, D compared to A distance behind it. I think A to C feels fair.
All right. But the best part is by now, everyone has already raised all their points in the comments.
I know. More engagement.
The engagement is incredible.
It was all a plan. No, I'm an impulsive asshole. So, no, but I agree with a lot of your points. And I think the Boseiju argument is something I forget about a lot, actually. And I think that's, we're going to talk about Cody here in this episode. And I think that is a reason to play Golos over Cody in some respects. And, we'll get into that when we get there. But I think that's a very interesting argument. And I think we could probably dive into that pretty deeply. Next up on our list is another food chain commander. This is Cazur, Ruthless, Stalker, and Ukkima, Stalking Shadow. This is kind of supplanted Sidisi as the go-to Sultai food chain commander Ryan, last year you gave it a B. What do you think of it this year?
There hasn't been anything really that I have seen that has wowed me from this commander partner pair, if you will, since the last time I've ranked it. I'm kind of in your camp where food chain is just becoming less and less of a viable strategy every year. Every year we get better and more compact win conditions, and food chain just keeps getting more and more clunky. It's kind of getting left behind. It is in 3 colors. It is in some of the best 3 colors, and it does misread once again. But it is in Sultai, and Sultai is no slouch. We talked about that, with Tasigur, and that still is the same here. That being said, we're still on food chain. We're still missing red. And so I know it's kind of weird, but I kind of feel that all food chain strategies just kind of end up in the C tier to me. I don't think this falls necessarily down into the D tiers or anything, but I would probably rank this, similar to probably just a C again. Last year I gave it a B, but I don't really have anything new to say about food chain that I haven't already talked about with First Sliver. Yeah. So I'm going to put it at a C.
All right. What do you think? Pongo? Is it, you gave it a C last year? Has it gotten better or worse?
I agree again with a lot of Ryan's points, but I just don't think that Cazur Ukkima is substantially worse or really appreciably worse than Tasigur. I kind of put them at the same level in my mind. They can kind of do the same thing ultimately. And you still get access to kind of an extra win condition in Cazur Ukkima, or even, a couple of extra win conditions in them. So for me, I don't think that personally, this is my take on the matter, and not everyone agrees. I don't think that the deck is as good as the First Sliver. I think those 2 extra colors do make a difference, especially, and Cazur Ukkima kind of being a win condition, a pure win condition in the command zone where you don't need to necessarily play outlets, doesn't put them over the First Sliver for me, especially now that we live in a time where the First Sliver gets to layer with Underworld Breach, and your outlets are things that are basically Praetor's Grasp for Oracle, Brain Freeze, which you're playing for your Underworld Breach lines. Your outlets are basically all just cards that you're playing, and because they're decent or because they layer with other win conditions. So I think that, especially with those updates, for me, the additional sort of benefits for your consult lines are a little bit, those are I value them. I value that a little less highly than I used to. So I think, it really just boils down to the fact that Cazur Ukkima doesn't feel significantly worse than Tasigur for me. So I'm going to put them at a B.
Okay. So you're giving it the upgrade.
Yeah, but I can't remember why I gave it a C last year.
Okay. Again, you were memeing a lot last year, so it's the line between where you were serious and where you were joking was kind of blurred.
Exactly.
So I gave it a D last year. I'm going to keep giving it a D. I think it's worse than the First Sliver. I think it is awful to be on food chain strategies right now. And I think it's noticeably worse than Tasigur, actually. It doesn't, outside of food chain, I don't feel that it brings anything unique to the strategy. And honestly, if I was going to, I could make a very solid argument, in my opinion, that cEDH is better than this. And I could do that in a different video. I could. I think it's a great deck.
I would agree. cEDH is better in my opinion.
I think cEDH is more compelling, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
I think
cEDH's not on this list.
cEDH didn't make it on because people don't talk about it, but it's a suboptimal strategy with food chain. Like I said before, it's weak to rule of law. It does have the advantage of having a clear game plan, but I do think that the game plan that it has is just bad. Now, this is With this being said, we've talked a lot about bad strategies, and I've said a lot about how I think food chain's not very good, yada, yada, yada. I want to make sure that if you are playing food chain and you're experimenting with it and you're trying to build something new out of it, please prove me wrong. I don't say this as to stifle anybody from doing something. You know what I mean? This is just my assessment of it, of where I kind of feel about it. And here,
I think every meta is different.
Yeah.
I think every your mileage will always vary. Your meta might be super conducive to food chain.
Exactly.
So like you might do great with a food chain strategy. So while it might not work out for you in particular, Callahan, it might work out great for somebody else.
Yeah. And it's just a little bit of context on what we're giving these ratings on is like, if we're going into a blind meta, you know, what would the three of us say are the best in like kind of an order, right? And that's just for some context. Excuse my tangent, but next on the list is a commander that fell pretty far in the MLC draft, which I was not expecting, but is a pretty good commander. I'll see where it lands for everybody, but it's Urza Lord High Artificer in Ryan. We talked about a lot about monocolors last week and, kind of our opinions on them. Where does Urza land for you? Last year you gave it an A. What about this year?
So when I played Urza for the first time, it was when it was first spoiled in 2019. Played the ISO Rev combo. Used to play it with Paradox. That's how long ago I played it. I played it post ban with it's the powered scepters, what it kind of became. And then this year I played the Polytyrant build. Now there is discussion, and that discussion is heated about which of the builds is better. Urza does a lot of things and takes things that you might want to play anyway and just make them better, and can do things like break parity on a crippling stack pieces like Static Orb or Winter Orb or Trinisphere or something. And not many things can break parity that easily. It can provide mana advantage because like you cast it, immediately get the construct, tap the construct immediately. And it does it. And it's in blue, which is arguably the best color in this format. It does so many things, and people have built, have really worked hard on these. It does suffer a couple of problems. I think the Polytyrant build, in my opinion, is not the superior build.
I agree.
In order to make the Polytyrant build work, you have to sacrifice really great cards, Hull Breacher before it was banned, Gilded Drake to completely hose commander-centric strategies. Image for people's dock sides or even other stuff. There's so many great blue creatures out there that you have to lose just to make Polytyrant work. That really hurts it. Now, the ISO Rev build and stuff like that is still good. It's just basically a general mono blue control / win conless, or I guess super intricate combo or whatever. That's right. It's also an outlet in the command zone. God, this card just does so much.
It really does.
It just does so many things because you could just, spin the wheel, if you will, and cast all your cards. And that's how you create twister loops and stuff like that. And so there's all of these great things that it does. If we're talking the Polytyrant build, we're definitely not in A territory anymore. Everyone keeps arguing that that's the superior build. I am disagreeing with a lot of people out there as somebody who has piloted the Polytyrant build. It's super choreographed. You see it coming a mile away. It's so easy to disrupt and you just get hosed. But Urza as a commander is still really, really strong. So I would say that because people are favoring Polytyrant over ISO Rev nowadays, that it is actually going to knock down a tier for me.
Okay.
It's hard because they're so different. The ISO Rev is just general blue, good stuff win the game, and Polytyrant is built such a particular way. Like I would almost rate those decks at different tiers. So it's hard for me to say, well, Urza is just this, because if one of the other builds will kind of pilot differently and therefore change how effective it is, in my opinion. I'm going to give Urza a B. That's where I'm going to put Urza right now.
All right. Pongo, you gave Urza a B. Are you sticking with it, or what do you think?
I think it's probably going to be my turn to have the hot take this time.
All right.
And I'm pretty excited. So I actually feel like I couldn't disagree with Ryan more on the non tyrant build being better. In fact, I would never, ever play the non tyrant build. Like,
Pongo, we're going to have a talk about your membership to the Sculpty Boys.
Yeah, I would never, ever play the non tyrant build ever again. And I played it for a long time. I played it since the very, very beginning. I was, sort of loosely involved with some of the early brewing around, UPS. And I think that after Paradox Engine got banned and just kind of like a few other things changing in the format, that build of the deck became so much more clearly worse than the Polytyrant build. The Polytyrant build, and I'll articulate my reason why. And I think that probably this should put into context some of my other valuations. I personally value extremely highly having clean lines to win with the deck, with any deck that I play. I want to know sort of how I'm winning in any position from any position. I want enough tutor support to be able to get there reliably. And I want my whole deck and the colors that I'm playing to really broadly support all of that. Decks without win cons, for the most part, don't appeal to me too much. Obviously, I kind of make some exceptions for decks that can reliably put out, powerful locks that are very difficult to break. But I don't think Urza does a good enough job doing that at all. And I think also Urza is pretty vulnerable to getting trapped under its own locks in a lot of situations. Mm-hmm. And I think that, ultimately the standard Urza deck does not do a good enough job actually closing out games, because it's kind of hard to assemble Scepter combo in mono blue. I think Scepter combo, broadly speaking, is, kind of like to go back to like what Ryan was saying about Food Chain. It's much less good these days than it used to be. It's outclassed. It's been outclassed over the course of time. And the reason why I'm so outspoken or I'm so passionate about this is because I played Urza for a really, really long time. And that actually led me. That's like literally my supervillain origin story that got me to like look at Kinnan and like figure out the Kinnan lines, because I said, I'm done playing Urza. Like, this deck just doesn't have clean ways to win. And as a result of that, I went and started digging into tech and found the mirror lines for Kinnan, and like the rest is history for me.
Yeah. So what's your tier rating?
My rating?
What's the
I
rating?
just ranted and I just forgot to rate it.
And just like drop the mic and walk away and forgot to give the rating. Now he's going to go pick up the mic off the stage.
I do have a rating.
And like dust it off.
Yeah, I'm going to come back up, dust off the mic. Hold on. There we go. So for me, Urza's like a fairly quintessential C tier commander.
C tier?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's so interesting because you like, I felt you climbing a hill that you were ready to die on, and you rated it lower than me. That's so funny.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think always going to rate it lower than you no matter what. Yeah, based on that. But I didn't rate it substantially lower than you, I guess. Maybe
that's true.
Maybe that's what you meant.
We're in the noise. We're in the noise, I'd say.
I'm not going to argue the merits of, whatever strategy. What I will argue is that the design of the card really kind of puts you in a box when it comes to deck building, right? Like, you're pretty much going to play exactly one strategy. And I think that's my biggest knock on it. Is I said this last week, right? That I don't think the average monocolor commander that's cEDH playable can overcome a C tier rating without being pushed in some regard, right? And I do think Urza overcomes it. I do. However, my biggest complaint is that when I feel like you're playing Urza, you have to play stacks. And I wish there was a different way to play Urza. I understand why, like, that's the best way of going about it. But I just don't like that game plan for it. And it just feels really weird and clunky to me. And like, I agree with both of you. I think that the Poly Tyrant build feels super clunky, but I also think that the ISO Rev version feels super clunky as well. And I just prefer the ISO Rev version because like I'm more used to playing with that. But I don't really like where Urza is positioned. Wow, I can't talk. Positioned in the meta overall, but I do think that it's a pretty good, commander that is uniquely powerful. So I think I'm going to demote it from S tier. Unfortunately, gave it S tier last year. I'm going to put it in B tier. I just think it has a lot to overcome in 2021's meta game, and being in a monocolor and being stuck in a slower game plan kind of makes it harder to overcome some of those things. I think it does overcome the mana disadvantage though very, very quickly because Urza is just insane.
I do want to just clarify one thing, because like I did go on a bit of a long rant, and I feel like ultimately I didn't necessarily tie that back to my rating closely enough. I think that like Scepter Urza I would give a D, and the C that I'm giving is for the Poly Tyrant build. And to tie it back to my rant, I think that's because, the Poly Tyrant build has 1 card win conditions, and, you have an artifact based win condition that you can actually tutor for in mono blue. And again, as I was trying to articulate, that's something that I value very, very highly in any commander.
Yeah. I just, my biggest knock on that is I just don't like sacrificing all your card quality.
Well, I don't think you do. Like, you just give up some options and you just play other options instead, right? Like, you're not sacrificing all your card quality. You're sacrificing some good options in what is the deepest. It's the single color that has the deepest card pool in cEDH.
That's fair. Well, all of that was standing. We could do an episode on this. Lots of episode ideas here today. Up next is the Gitrog Monster. And
I hope there's enough recording space left. Anyway, I'm sorry. I that was almost like a dump or an unload, and I don't mean to do that. And so I apologize if I've offended anyone out there, but I'm definitely knocking it down to at least a B. Because while I'm trying my best to do these in isolation, sometimes you just, sometimes it's just too hard.
Sometimes it can be hard to disentangle those things.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to put it as a B. This is my personal experience. Everyone else's experience might vary, but I know that is what I have run into time and time again with the Frog server and just frog people and stuff like that. And I'm not a fan of it personally. So B tier in isolation, trying my best to keep those things out of the equation.
All right. Well, Pongo, you gave it a B last year. I know Morgan, Spleenface, doesn't like it a whole lot. What do you think of it?
Sorry, I'm like currently fearing for my life. I feel like the Gitrog Monster players are going to come for us.
If there was ever a bit that could get us doxxed.
You see what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying? They don't say that about like the Urza server. The Urza server doesn't do that,
Yeah, the gentlemen and gentle ladies and people over at the Urza server.
That's right. Yeah.
The monsters in the Gitrog Monster server. All joking aside, I was not expecting you to go give it a B after that, to be honest. I thought
neither was I.
I'm trying to stay objective. It's still a good commander.
Yes.
It really is, in my opinion.
Right.
But boy, all that with it. Anyway, go ahead.
I'm going to try to talk about, what I feel like some of its strengths are, and try to provide a bit of analysis here. before I get into my rating. So, what I see the Gitrog Monster as providing is, a reasonably compact win condition in the sense that, there's sort of 2-card combinations that get there. Additionally, the Gitrog Monster is a very powerful grind engine in a lot of situations. I think it has, access to 2 strong colors, but, obviously could have access to more colors and, theoretically access to stronger colors. I think for what it's trying to do, though, it has access to 2 of the best colors it could want. And so realistically, I would just probably want to add like red or something. So, all that being said, we are talking about a powerful outlet in the command zone, value engine in the command zone. I think that the Gitrog Monster does suffer from, costing 5 mana. That being said, the deck plays a lot of fast mana, as we know. 5 mana need not necessarily be, that much of a big hindrance, especially if you've got access to black. Especially, now that we have Jeweled Lotus. I think that the Gitrog Monster with red would be very formidable. I think in the 2 colors that it has, it kind of leaves a little bit to be desired in terms of card quality. And I think that there's sort of like a more recent phenomenon of like these powerful asymmetrical hate bears that, for whatever reason, like all of them that get printed seem to give the Gitrog Monster fits, like without fail, like every single one, like Draneth Magistrate, like kind of really rough for the Gitrog Monster because it's a 5 mana commander. And, we're talking about a 2-drop hate piece that can come down. Opposition Agent is annoying because obviously when you're playing green and black, like you've got access to a lot of tutors and you're pretty happy to use them. But, the Gitrog Monster can win through that just fine. Still annoying. We've also got Dauthi Voidwalker recently, which is really quite obnoxious.
Dauthi in this is a bad time.
Yeah. And, I guess thankfully for the Gitrog Monster, Hull Breacher got banned recently. But like, when we were talking about like having Hull Breacher in every deck, Dauthi Voidwalker in a significant proportion of decks, and like same thing with Draneth Magistrate. What we saw was that the Gitrog Monster started to morph into this deck that has to play like a lot of removal. And then when it plays a lot of removal, that kind of means that now it automatically needs to play along a more grindy axis because it's devoting less slots towards its own sort of greedy game plan. And, additionally, it needs to have that removal when it, when the time arises, which is not always a given. All of these things kind of add up to like the Gitrog Monster not necessarily being the monster that it used to be. I think that for a very long time, I can think back to, like early on in the partner meta where I would have been like pretty okay and pretty quick to give the Gitrog Monster an A rating because, it's an extremely resilient deck. We like to say that the Gitrog Monster is like a cockroach. Like you just can't put it down. Like it just keeps coming, kind of like a commander, I think that we're going to talk about right after this one. You can try to put it down, but like it just keeps getting back up. And again, I think that it's in good colors to support the game plan that it's trying to do. And it's also a game plan that's, outside of the cards that I named, relatively hard to interact with. But, that being said, it's still going to be outclassed by a lot of sort of the commanders that people are playing these days and a lot of the tools that we have now. I think I'm probably going from a B to a C tier. I think it's a high C. I think if I was rating it a B, it would be a low B. So this is somewhere like in the B minus C plus range for me, but I'm going to put it in the C tier just because, again, I just feel like the Gitrog Monster hasn't gotten all that many tools recently. Its game plan kind of keeps getting like diluted a little bit by needing to fight against like the sort of like really asymmetrical, powerful cards that keep getting printed and will probably continue getting printed. And yeah, you know, I just don't necessarily see things changing in that regard for it.
Interesting. Well, I agree with a lot of what both of you have said. I don't really have a whole lot other to add to it other than it doesn't feel as much of a boogeyman as it used to be. You know what I mean? Like, there was a time in cEDH where the First Sliver, the Gitrog Monster felt like one of the S tier boogeymen, you know, kind of like Zur, right? Where Zur was just like, oh, shoot. And don't worry, I'm not evaluating it the same way I'm evaluating Zur. I think Gitrog Monster kind of suffers from some of the same things Urza suffers from that I knocked it on as being, there's really only like one way to build it, right? It's not conducive to coming, like once you figure out the best way of winning, there's not a lot of new innovations that you can come up with after that. You know what I mean? And so the deck ends up getting stale. And I just, you know, when decks get stale and they don't grow and they don't change, they don't get to, you know, maintain their status in my mind. And I agree with Pongo. I think it's a C tier commander. But our next commander on the list, Ryan, how excited are you for this?
I'm super worried.
All right, you're super worried.
Super worried.
So next commander on our list is Godo, Bandit, Warlord. And last year, Ryan, you gave it an S, and this is your chance to sing the praises of Mono Red Godo again. I presume you're going to give it an S again.
So I will hold off my rating till the end of my next hot take ticket that I'm cashing in right now. Thank you very much, Carnival Barker. I'd like to cash in another ticket, please. All right. So it's for those out there that know me, they know that I am Godo is my main love. It's the number one in my heart. Okay. So it's what I started with. It's what I got into cEDH with. It's always going to hold a place in my heart. So I'm going to remove all of that for this. And I am going to evaluate it on what I have seen as a pilot of the deck for the last 2.5 years. Every set, there seems to be something that gets released that makes Godo worse. Not better, worse. There's a new silver bullet piece that shuts Godo down. Drannith Magistrate was a huge hurt to a lot of decks. It was especially a huge hurt to Godo. And then we had Opposition Agent. We had all of these things. And it seems that every single set, more and more things are coming out that just completely hurt the deck. And so what we have seen in the Godo community from the primer and on the server and stuff is like, okay, people are running this now and it's shutting us down. What are we going to do to stop it? And so we keep having to sacrifice, our speed, which made Godo so good for such a long time, in my opinion. It was the threat at the table. It's what you have to account for. You have to be able to shut down Godo. But what we keep having to do in order to stay relevant, in order to stay, competitive in this meta, is we have to sacrifice another speed item for another item that can interact with what shuts us down. We transferred to Mouth of Ronan and started running Snow-Covered Mountains because we needed to be able to stop the opposition agents and the Drannith Magistrates. We ran Command Beacon, and now we're running a whole bunch of creature hate in the form of sweepers. Like, we were on Blasphemous Act at one point. We were on Starstorm. We're running Fury now. And we're running all of these things to stop all of these bullets against us. And it keeps happening with every single set release. Everyone that's, every time that you see a card that gets kind of spoiled in the latest set, and that's like, what a cool card. every time the Red Love Discord is sweating because they're like, how's Godo going to stop this? How's Godo going to stop that? Do we have what's necessary to stop this? And we keep having to sacrifice more and more and more in order to be able to still stay relevant, still stop these pieces. And it's hurting the deck. We're on, this stacks plan in a lot more pieces now. We're on this creature removal plan in a lot more pieces. And every single piece of creature removal we're running is one less piece of speed that we get to pack in. Our mulligans have become twice as hard now. It's, a lot of times for years, I've been always just saying Godo grows with you as a deck. And because you can count to 11, and win the game. And Godo seems to be straying a little further away from that every quarter or, sometimes every set release. We're getting on plans that are trying to help us, fight this like impending tidal wave that keeps wanting to wash us over and essentially wash us out to sea and make us no longer relevant. And I really appreciate and respect everyone who's the author of the primer and the core authors of the deck. They're great people. Everybody at the Red Love Discord that offers their 2 cents and tests it and stuff like that. They're all fantastic people, but it feels like they're fighting a losing battle. We're not getting as many dockside extortionists as we used to. We're still getting amazing blue cards and amazing green cards because that's what sells Commander product. But we're not getting great, awesome, hey, this pushes Godo back forward. I put it in S tier because of my love for it before. And I'll still use a little of that bias here today. But it is a B tier Commander nowadays. Wow. And I can already hear the ping from the Discord kicking me out, perma-banning me from Red Love, stripping my Warlord title away, banishing me to the likes of everywhere else. And I just want to say I'm sorry, but it's true. All right. We've just been fighting this uphill battle for a long time, and we're starting to lose our ground. We really are. All right. So it sucks. I hate it because I'll still play the deck. I still love it, but that's where we are.
Pongo, you gave it a C. What do you think? I have to jump in here real quick. Ohio State just scored a touchdown, so you're free.
Yay, Ohio!
I am watching this football game while we're doing this, so don't mind me. If I exclaim and enjoy, that's why.
If you just nod along and blindly agree with everything we say, and we know why. Gotcha.
I have ADHD. I'm really good at multitasking.
I'm just happy that my friend's happy.
So anyhow, Pongo.
So I agree fully with what Ryan said, and I think I was articulating exactly that for the Gitrog Monster. I think that it applies to both decks, and it's something that you see, I think, happening a lot with lower color decks. In fact, it's a recurring trend for lower color decks in particular, and I think a big part of that too is with less access to additional colors. You have fewer pivot points and different plans that you can take advantage of to play around these hate pieces. You kind of end up having a more stereotyped plan that tends to, fold a little more seriously to some given new piece of technology. So I think, Ryan, you're right on the money with that, and I agree fully. I think what exacerbates the issue even more, and this applies for the Gitrog Monster and Godo, is that the interaction that these decks end up being forced to play for their own proactive game plan is very poor, often useless against the Turbo Nos decks at the table. So you find yourself in this pattern where you're playing all these tools to fight mid-range decks that traditionally you shouldn't have really needed tools to fight other than just speed, and sort of like some of the natural strengths of your commander and your strategy. I think Godo in particular is just that you should be playing all this fast mana and having a 1-card win condition in the command zone is card advantage kind of in and of itself. But when you're being denied that entire axis, you need to pull out the big guns, so to speak. But these things leave you softer to decks that are not as weak along the removal axis. And that's unfortunate because those decks are such an important part of the metagame right now. So I would, agree with Ryan. I gave Godo a C last time, and I'm sticking with a C. I think it's a very, very powerful deck. A lot of people are probably seeing that I'm giving a lot of C ratings. And I think that, that's because for me, a C rating is, a very good rating. I think that a lot of people see a C and, are maybe conditioned to think that that's not so good. But I think it's an average rating. It means that this is a deck that should perform at what I consider to be kind of an average level at a cEDH table for the most part. And, when we start talking about S versus A, the difference is pretty small. When we start talking about the difference between A versus B, again, the difference is relatively small. And, then B versus C, the difference remains small, which if the difference remains small at all of those intervals, then the difference between an S and a C is not as big as the discrete categories might make it seem. So I just wanted to get that out there.
I don't really have a whole lot to add to this. I think the only thing I would add to this is I still do think that Godo is very uniquely explosive. I have seen Hoki get enough turn 1 wins on that deck that I still think it's pretty good. I'm really waffling here. I feel conflicted because I think that it's very close to being either a low B or a high C to me. I think red has become one of the premier colors, and Ryan and you, Pongo, both brought up things that I was going to bring up later in the show, but I guess I'm going to talk about it here. Is I don't think Op Agent is as much of a hate piece as we give it credit for. There was last year, I really evaluated a lot of decks along the axis of, does it die to, or, can it play through a opposition agent? And I'm just really not evaluating it that same way this year. Because I think opposition agent is very, very good and very, very strong. And I do think it does handicap a lot of decks. But I think Godo definitely can't play through that. And I think there's a deck coming up specifically that can figure its way through it. And so, for that reason, I'm out. I'm going with a C. But I was giving my Shark Tank explanation of why I was jumping ship or so. Felt like Mark Cuban there for a second. But I'll get into that more with another commander that's coming up on our list. But yeah, I don't know that I totally agree with the logic that Draneth and opposition agent exists, therefore the deck is worse. I do think that there should be considerations in Godo to play more removal that looks like more traditional mono red removal. As far as I might be talking out of my ass here, so bear with me. Do you guys play Lightning Bolt? Because okay.
Well, we actually have sacrificed a lot of the standard Lightning Bolts for the free type. The Pyrokinesis, the Fury. So or Thunderclap, where you can sack a mountain. So we can tap out and still be able to do stuff.
I still think playing Lightning Bolt is absolutely useful. Personally.
Oh, yeah. But we ran Lightning Bolt for years. I think we're still on it.
That would be a card that I wouldn't cut ever. But that's just me.
When you have so much free creature or targeted remomal.
Yeah, but a lot of it's sorcery speed. And I feel like you want being able to operate on the stack is really useful.
Then that's, Thunderclap's an instant, but
Fury's not, right? But
Fury's not, which is ridiculous because all the other,
and it's based off of an instant too.
yeah,
we talked about that in the set review.
We're still on Lightning Bolt.
Okay, good. Okay, But yeah, I would just that's kind of my 2 cents on it. But again, I don't do much with red. I don't play red a ton. So, there you go. But anyhow, on to our next commander, which is we're going from one person's baby to the next, is Derevi Empyrial Tactician. And Ryan, you gave it a C last year. Do you still think it's a C?
My opinion really hasn't changed on this much, partly because I don't ever see it anymore.
Okay.
Like I see
it
Zur
plenty
more than I don't see it at all. I see Zur more than I see Derevi nowadays. That's not saying it's bad. That's just saying I don't see it. I don't see it in my local meta. I don't see it in our leagues. I don't think a single person played it in our tournament. I don't know about like the tier 1 con tournament or anything, or if Derevi was played there, but like you just don't see Derevi anymore. And Derevi gets dual tools and stuff like that. And that's great. But I haven't seen any piece of tech that has come out that has been like, oh my God, Derevi just shot to the front of the line. There hasn't been anything like that. That at least I have seen or I have heard chatter about. Derevi's still fine. I think Derevi can still put down numbers. I think it's still good. I just think it's just average compared to everything else. Cheating commander tax is nice. Being able to put it in instance speed is nice. Being able to break parity on stacks pieces is nice. So, I mean, I would, but it doesn't have things like it's not necessarily a win con in the command zone unless there's been a pivot I'm unaware of. You'll have to forgive me. Piece. I just never see it. Yeah. You just never see it anymore. And like I said, that just might be what I've been experiencing in my world. For all I know, it's super prolific in some metas, and I'm just missing it. And that's fine. I'm really not changing my opinion on it. It's still a C. I don't think it's a bad commander. Going to what Pongo said before, C is not a bad rating. Yeah. C is just an average rating. It's just like, middle of the road. You won't go wrong for choosing this. Whereas if like you choose, in my opinion, something like an F commander, be like, you've got work ahead of you. Don't be prepared to win, 3 out of every 4 of your games. Derevi is fine. I'm sure it does good work. I'm sure it's still just as good as it was then. I just never really see any noise about it anymore. It's, going a little bit at the Tasigur route to me. So, okay. So that's where I'm at a C.
I have to tell you guys, the Buckeyes are playing amazing defense, and I'm trying so hard not to cheer right now. Pongo, you gave it an A last year, and I know this is your baby. What are your thoughts?
So I would tend to actually agree with a lot of what Ryan said. I think that Derevi has gotten new tools that keep it relevant to some extent. The Emil lines with Gaia's Cradle finally give it kind of a compelling win condition that you can play. Considering that deck pretty much always wants Gaia's Cradle anyway, because it's one of the most broken cards you can play with Derevi. It's nice to combo with that, to put it lightly. That being said, it's still not the easiest combo to assemble because you tend to have to go through some like awkward tutor chains, either through Spellseeker to get like crop rotation or like Sylvan Scrying or whatever. And then obviously you need another creature tutor. Derevi is not generating a ton of value in terms of cards. Traditionally, she's more of a mana engine. And so a lot of, the newer decks kind of playing like a tempo style, but they can occasionally find themselves running out of gas as a result because it's kind of difficult to play that style and then, not run out of gas because like you're not really playing static hate pieces. You're playing mostly counter magic to interact with your opponents. And then you also have to assemble a 2-card win condition, which is tricky. Right. I don't think that Derevi, even the new Derevi decks, in my estimation, are quite good enough still to be in the same tier as, your Gitrog monsters of the world. Even like your sort of, I guess you could say your grindier like Pacos of the world. I think this might be the first commander here on this list that I give a D rating to. maybe like I would say a C-, or a /D+. I think that the deck can certainly still do okay. But again, I do think it has a few weaknesses. It still needs a few new tools, I would say. And I could easily imagine those getting printed, but we don't quite have them yet. And as a result, it doesn't feel quite as good as some of the commanders that I put in the C tier. So as a result, I think I'm going to, I put it in the D tier. It's kind of like a C-, D+ type of thing.
Okay. I don't have a ton to add to that discussion. I think that it's still pretty solid. Last year I gave it an F, which, was a joke. But I think it's perfectly fine. Like, I think it's a solid C tier commander to me. I do think that if you're going to try and play a tempo strategy in Bant, you're better served trying to do something with a Shy, maybe, which I've seen some people working on. But Derevi doesn't deal enough damage, right, to play an effective enough tempo strategy, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's not like a tempo people out and kill them type of strategy, unless you're playing like Derevi Prison. It's more of like you're using Derevi as a mana engine so that you can kind of outpace your opponents in terms of, the cards that you play. But the problem is, you can run out of gas operating along that axis relatively easily. I obviously really enjoy playing the deck still. I do pull it out, and I still maintain multiple versions of the deck, and I still actively, search out tech for it and so on and so forth. But again, we're kind of rating these things all in the relative, and I just think that, in the relative, it has a few issues compared to some other decks that I put in the C tier, and so. I'm either putting it like low C tier or high D tier, and I just think it's easier to put into the D tier at this point.
Okay. Well, moving on to the next commander on our list, and I know you guys are going to have fun with this. Is Lavinia Azorius Renegade, and Ryan, last year you gave it a C, so right in the middle. What do you think about it now?
So this one is a little bit more tricky for me because of two reasons. Number one, she is in her colors inherently weak. Azorius is tough. Not many people can say, hey, what's the main combo in cEDH for Azorius? And they'll be like, and then like try and pull something out. Whereas like you could say it in just about all other colors. You could say you could do this or that or this other thing. And Azorius is it's always struggled to find a win con. And that's always been a hard part, is closing out games. Like you can always kind of set yourself up for things like, well, in the example of Lavinia, like a hard lock, or you set yourself up in a way like with Grand Arbiter or maybe with Brago, but it's really hard to like close out the game. And I know that you've done a lot of work on this. I know that like Knowledge Pool, this thing was, this deck is called Omen Pool, and a Knowledge Pool was removed not too long ago, I think.
Yeah, last update.
Yeah, and so it's like, wow, some of these cards that are the mainstay of it aren't even good enough anymore. So it does let me know that, it is making strides. I also know that here, as of the Turbo Nas meta being as prolific as it is, having an effect like this in the command zone is actually really super good. Like not being able to play your fast mana anymore, which is such a key piece of ad nauseum strategies, So now it's not just I'll puke out my hand, and cast an ad nauseum turn one. Now you've got to remove the Lavinia and then cast your ad nauseum. So it kind of puts them a little bit more on the back foot, which makes it a little bit harder. That being said, if you're not in a great turn order, sometimes they'll just do that anyway. They'll just puke out their hand and then just, remove it and then go. Whereas they're way set back in maybe a scenario where you're a little bit more leading in the turn order. So being turn order dependent that severely is kind of tough. Closing out the game is kind of tough. being in the colors is kind of tough. I would probably keep it at a C. A lot of people can fight, creature removal is very prolific in this meta. It's not hard. Everyone packs it because of all these silver bullets on creatures nowadays. So I think I'll keep it at a C because it hurts Turbonauz more, and Turbonauz is so prolific, but it's definitely not unbeatable. So I'll put it at C.
Yeah. Pongo, you gave it an E last year, and I'm sure that was just to piss me off.
Oh no!
So what do you actually think about it?
First thing I'll say is I'm just looking over the list, and I just noticed that we don't have Hullen on the list, and I guess you put Derevi on the list because of my association with the deck, but I feel like Hullen is certainly like the better band commander. But in any case,
some stuff was cut for time.
Fair. And I think Derevi's D tier makes sense in light of the fact that Hullen is like in my opinion, the superior band commander. But back to the matter at hand. Begin the roast of Callahan. So I've said this before, half joking, but maybe less than half joking, maybe like 30% joking, 70% seriously. But I feel like when somebody brings Lavinia to the table, it's kind of like, hey guys, I brought my legacy deck. What are you all playing? Like,
not wrong.
And so it feels like you're playing a legacy blue-white control deck in like the completely wrong format, right? Like where it just like everyone is doing these like super broken things.
And you're playing super fair magic.
You're not just, you're playing like the fairest of the fair magic. And like, again, you're somehow even playing like the wrong format in a way. So I'm going to get this out there and then I'll explain my reasoning. Lavinia on the play, E tier. Any other position, F tier.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
And my reasoning for this, kind of goes back to, wow, you put the E. That's only 25% of the time, Callahan.
It's good enough for me.
I'll take it. He's on Lavinia. Of course he takes any margin he can get.
You got to put it in F, brother. I think that Oswald is better than Lavinia.
Oh, that's hogwash. Shut the fuck up.
I stand by that. He's not changing it. Okay.
You just got to accept it. We can't edit his spreadsheets.
Okay, here we go. Yeah. So yeah, being an F tier doesn't mean that this is not a deck that you can ever, that will never win a game at a cEDH table. I just think that, what F tier for me represents is that you're essentially stacking the odds against you when you sit at the table with this deck. And I don't think anyone would disagree with that assessment of Lavinia sort of in the abstract. But, more to the point, Lavinia's issues are, like Ryan said, blue-white does struggle with win conditions. You can play, like paradigm shift type win conditions and stuff like that. And those are not bad, actually. I think that like as a win condition, people underestimate sort of the quality of that, but now we have to compound the issue of that, not being an incredible win condition, but also, not terrible, with the fact that it's quite difficult to actually assemble that in the colors, because again, tutoring for creatures in blue-white, not a trivial thing to do, and you don't really have a lot of tutors. I mean, you have some tutors for instants and sorceries, but like, you don't have a ton. Like what you would really want to have in blue-white is an artifact-based win condition, kind of like you would have in blue-green. But obviously in green, you can play creature-based win conditions. And same thing in blue-red. Pretty much all these low-color blue decks, I think, want artifact win conditions. Interestingly, Lavinia actually has that as an option. You do have what's sort of a win condition in like the knowledge pool locks, in the omen machine locks, but the way I see it, and the way, I've talked about this with Callahan before, is that, those are sort of so non-deterministic as win conditions that you don't even want to actually build the deck to assemble them. So the deck doesn't really play artifact tutors to assemble the lock, and kind of would just sort of rather draw it into it naturally and play, as high card quality in terms of like, big bombs and sort of like big draw spells, big value engines and stuff like that. And this is kind of like where I'm coming from when I say that this is a legacy deck that you've brought to a cEDH table, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, like if you're playing Jace the Mind Sculptor as a win condition, or like 5 mana Teferi as a win condition, these are win conditions that you would more often see in legacy. And so, I don't necessarily mean that like purely like in a derogatory fashion, because legacy is obviously an extremely powerful format. It's more the fact that the cards you see, the interactions you see, are things that you will see more often in a legacy deck than in a cEDH deck. And I also think that they don't necessarily scale super, super well into multiplayer, which is not to say that, you can't win off of them. You certainly can, but it's not trivial to do so. I think that Lavinia...
the deck wins through beats most of the time, honestly.
Right. And it wins through beats with a 2/2 in the command zone, which, is not necessarily...
It plays like 22 creatures, to be fair, though.
Right. But my point is that, you're asking a lot of your ability to control the game, assemble, that much advantage.
Yeah. I agree with you there. Yeah.
So Lavinia herself doesn't provide advantage in the command zone for you. Obviously, she kind of does by denying your opponent's access to stuff. That's sort of one area where she's so much more powerful on the play, right? Because if you can deny people fast mana, then you're getting the most value out of Lavinia. But if you can't deny them, or you can't deny one player access to their fast mana, then that player gets disproportionately ahead on that axis. And you lose a lot of value from Lavinia in the command zone. And, she still ends up being useful against like ad nauseum strategies by requiring them to have 5 lands in play to put the card on the stack. By shutting off like Underworld Breach lines with Lion's Eye Diamond. But I think that unless you're in a sort of very particular meta, you can't only be doing that. If you get what I mean. Like, you have to be doing more. You can't have sort of like a blind spot or multiple blind spots, which are just like every other matchup. And I think that Lavinia doesn't necessarily have the tools to really address that issue. Beyond that, even in like the trip, like even in what theoretically could be an ideal case as far as like Lavinia's impact is concerned, which would be like a triple ad nause pod. You just got 3 people who are gunning to remove Lavinia. So that's like still not ideal. What you really want with Lavinia, I think, is she kind of can play a parasitic game where she can be playing substantially better cards in the situation that somebody else is helping you to sort of slow down the table like drastically.
Right.
So I think that she is somewhat parasitic, requiring another powerful stacks deck at the table. And again, I think that
I don't think a stacks. I think it needs another mid-range deck at the table at minimum.
Well, maybe a mid-range deck that doesn't have an efficient way to turn the corner. Right? Because otherwise, like if you're playing against your blue-black mid-range decks, like they'll just try to win, right? They're not interested in waiting around all day to let you develop, your, obviously better cards. And like, I'm not going to deny that fact. Like Teferi, like 5 mana Teferi is like a crazy bomb, a crazy powerful card, but it doesn't scale as well into multiplayer, like that power level. But obviously, if presented the opportunity to take advantage of it, it can do some nutty things. And so I think that my issue with Lavinia is that for a deck to be, even a C tier or even like a D tier for me, I would say, I don't want to be somewhat reliant on a particular pod dynamic. I want to have like kind of as good of a fighting chance at any pod, like or most pods. Like I would say, not necessarily any pod, but a broad spectrum of pods.
Okay.
And obviously, like I can kind of probably say that like if you're in E tier and you're in the D tier, you know, that space of pods where you're putting up like a real good fight becomes like smaller, like increasingly smaller. And so you're more reliant on kind of like a little bit of variance to go your way to have like a good chance of success in those pods, which is not to say that you can't. It's just kind of becomes a little bit more contingent on certain things being true.
So I think, okay, so I'm going to give my objective opinion on Lavinia as the person who writes the list.
S tier mic drop.
Yeah,
cut
exactly.
The video.
It's kind of, it does suffer from a lot of those issues. And it's sort of been the philosophy of the deck. You are absolutely correct. It does play a lot like a legacy deck. And part of that is the philosophy being that the hate piece in the command zone and other pieces that we also play that are hate pieces in the deck allow us to do that and just focus on card quality that, you know, you don't get in a Thrasios Tymna deck, for instance, right? Or some of the other decks where you have to focus on other sorts of things, or other, let me compare it to other control decks, I guess, where you don't get to do that. And so effectively, I think you're being a little too harsh on it. It doesn't have awful matchups anymore, except with Paco. Honestly, that's like its only awful matchup. Najeela isn't even unwinnable anymore because we've upped the creature count so much that we have the ability to get in the way of it. And especially something that I don't think enough people really realized was with the advent of Urza Saga, the deck got a huge shot in the arm because it turns out that Constructs are a good win con. There is a build of the deck that is centered around that, and I haven't decided if I like that more or not. But there is a lot as far as that goes, that I would say a year ago, the build of the deck, I would not feel comfortable playing this against most, like going into any meta, right? Now I feel like I could win, you know, at least 25% of my games playing this in any meta. Now, the caveat I will put on that is it's a deck that you gotta know. And you have to know the intricacies of how to play control in order to really play this deck correctly. Because if you're not good at making those decisions, which honestly, I'm not even that great at most of the time, you're not going to get the most out of it. And I think this kind of harkens back to something we talked about last week, right? Where, you know, a lot of people like to play Turbo Nas because it's flashy and all those sorts of things, right? And it makes you feel like you're really good at Magic. Well, when you play Control and you're a new player and you mess up, it makes you feel like you're really bad at Magic. And it makes you feel like your deck is really bad. And I don't think it's a reflection on the deck. I think that's a reflection on just the skill level. Certainly is a reflection on the deck, I would suppose. But I don't think that it's an F tier. I would say I'd probably put it in D tier if I was being completely honest. Just because, you know, has pretty good matchups against most of the things that are getting played these days. Since Nas is like the strategy, it just hoses stuff like Cody, and it hoses stuff like Rog Silas. I have multiple stories of in our local meta where I've just played that at a table with those two decks at the table and won the game because they can't win through what I'm doing and don't have enough removal to deal with my stuff. So it's one of those things where I see what both of you are saying. I think you're being a little hard on it. And I feel like D is super, super fair, honestly.
I just don't think that it's as good as Heliod, right? And I think that Heliod plays a lot of the same tools that you can play in Lavinia to hose the decks that you're talking about.
The difference being is that we get those out turn one every single game reliably.
I mean, Heliod can mulligan for stuff like that, I think.
Right, but if we don't have to mulligan that aggressively to find Draneth, right? Like, we have effectively that in the command zone on turn one.
Well, I mean, Heliod can find the rule of law effects that it plays, right? Like, you can get a Mana Crypt into a rule of law, or like an Aethersorn Canonist, which is sufficient for shutting down Cody and Rograk and stuff like that. Like, that, these are not things that are impossible for the deck to do. And in addition, you still have access to 1-card win conditions. And you can still fight on like a super grindy, like super fair axis. And I think that I probably favor Heliod in the type of game that Lavinia wants to play, just because of like the scaling clock and the lifelink and stuff like that.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know that I agree with that. I like being able to have stack interaction. And I think blue, and the fact that, the deck can just explode too. Like, I don't know. I don't agree with you on that.
That's fair.
I don't think Heliod is better than Lavinia. Michael, Charles, feel free to disagree with me, but that's how I feel. So anyway, after that 20-minute discussion, that about wraps things up for us here today. Ryan, for those people at home who are not aware of who you are and playing with power, where can they find you at?
Yep. So you can find us out on the Twitter sphere. We're putting out hot memes every day and really bad takes. So make sure that you go in there. And
your Callahan's really made sure of that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you can also find us on YouTube. That's our main place where we publish our content. We also have a podcast that's out now. You can find those on all your main podcast aggregators as well as YouTube as well.
Awesome. Well, you can find us if you are wanting to follow the Mind Sculptors on Twitter at SculptyBoys, BOIS, or you can find a direct link in our link tree in the description below. I want to also give a quick shout out to all of our patrons who help keep the lights on around here. If you too would like to become a patron, you can head on over to patreon.com/the Mind Sculptors, or again, check out the link in the description. Thank you all for joining us this week, and thank you again, Ryan, for joining us again on this long adventure. It's been a pleasure having you. And
thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. And from all of us here at the Mind Sculptors, I'm Callahan, and we'll see you next time.
I'm in line with the stars, I'm in sync with the earth. 10 toes deep, flower child from the turf. I never switch sides, like even when I die, I'm a ride for the squad, ladder ties in the hearse. I've been on the vibe, kinda hard to describe. I'm in between, I'm good and it's fine, but I'm tired of the grind. Then I come alive in the night to realize I'm in the middle of the time of my life. I never so packed for the stack, never lied on the rap. Got a bag from the way that I write it. Queen looking Tyson, do that ass survive, doing 80 to the house. Then I hit it to the sky, change haters on a tirade. Talking to the crib in the face, be still, let that hate stuff fade. We all want the same, we all want a meal in the safe. I wanna live like I'm trying to reach enlightenment. Trail spill from my lips, feel big from the bib. Take a sip till I pass out. Try and get grit, but it don't make sense. Cause you can lose life on this fast route. Yeah, turn thoughts to a cash cow. I might flip that to the glass house. I don't need the accolades, I'm in love with the chase. I just wanna eat, save a spot at the table. Beast with the slap, hit myself on the map. You long with the wind, but we knowing that it's capped. 5-hour flights, couple nights at the flat. To be real, couldn't see me making moves while I'm at. I'm still on the grind, limit time when I chat. I'm burning down sage, keep the demons away. When I write it, give a piece of myself to the page. I don't do it for the praise, love, that's just how I'm made.
Truth in the glass in the mirror. Yeah. Do it at me, old man, trying to pass in the fear. You're the first one to talk, but the last one to hear. Eyes blurry, but I